They found that some of the longest living humans had high cholesterol levels.
That's right. That's what the Sweden study found, for example. The paper just published a year or so ago. What were some of the most consistent themes? They had good glucose control and high cholesterol. I'm a great defender of cholesterol. It is a molecule of life. And so much depends on it. Mitochondria, for example. Mitochondria have to have a cholesterol molecule in them in order to work, like the very powerhouse of the cell. And the more you lower cholesterol through, say, drug interventions, the more you compromise the mitochondria. The sex hormones, all sex hormones are built on cholesterol. It's no surprise if someone takes a cholesterol-lowering medication, their sex hormones go down. This is why some men experience such terrible loss of libido, because he's becoming low testosterone because of the war on cholesterol.
But there's good and bad cholesterol, right?
Well, that's, as the story goes, yes, and yet I think that's overly simplified, where people will say LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol, and yet that gets included in these studies of longevity. So I think the good and bad aspect of it is not entirely fair or accurate. We need LDL. And LDL is just as much a component of the immune system. LDL actually helps the body fight infections, so it's also an unsung hero of immunity.
There is research suggesting that in very old age, high cholesterol levels do not always correlate with high mortality, and in some studies may even be linked to longer life.
Exactly.
Which is bizarre.
Yeah, well, you say that, and yet maybe our anti-cholesterol view is the bizarre one.
Yeah.
And so as a cynic who's very familiar with biomedical research, I sometimes will look at clinical markers and say, why are we so obsessed with glucose? Why not insulin? Why are we so obsessed with cholesterol? Why not triglycerides, which is another lipid that can be measured that is far more predictive of who's going to have a heart attack or not? And I think it's because we have chosen markers in modern medicine that we have well-designed drugs. So it's a really, really good way to sell a lot of drugs. So there's no drug that's going to address insulin, so let's not measure it. But there are lots of drugs that will lower glucose. So let's measure glucose, because then we can diagnose the problem, and then we can give them a drug and make a lot of money. That's a cynical view, but I don't think it's unjustified. Similarly with cholesterol. Why look at LDL when triglycerides, another lipid marker, are a much better indicator? It's because we don't have a drug that effectively lowers triglycerides. You can with diet, but we do have drugs that very effectively lower LDL.
One thing that really surprised me when I was reading your work is there was a study done in Bulgaria which proved that smoking causes insulin resistance in humans by having 7 healthy non-smokers smoke 4 cigarettes over an hour for 3 days. What did they find in that study?
Yeah, so they found that if you took healthy non-smoking people and had them start smoking, they became insulin resistant. I believe I invoked that study in the section where I was talking about inflammation, where when you cigarette smoke, that elicits, there's a lot of junk coming in, and there's a powerful inflammatory response, and that contributes to insulin resistance.
Is this vaping as well?
Oh, so that is a very good question. I have, in fact, published now multiple papers with a very good friend and colleague who is a lung expert at my university, a guy by the name of Paul Reynolds. Paul and I, we have published reports together looking at cigarette smoking and the inflammatory and insulin resistance effects that come from that. And now we've even started looking at the molecules, the hyperheated molecules from vaping, and they're terrible. In fact,